Zohran Mamdani is pushing for drastic changes to New York's estate tax. Madison Alworth has been following this. Look, I'm following it too. This is going to hurt the middle class. I thought you wanted to tax just the rich.
Yeah, well, this proposal hits a lot more New Yorkers than just the rich, including the middle class. Mayor Mamdani is suggesting slashing New York's estate tax exemption threshold by nearly 90%. Under Mamdani's plan, the threshold would drop from just over $7 million to $750,000. And the top estate tax rate would go from 16% to 50%. New York is one of a dozen states and D.C. that impose separate state-level estate taxes on top of the federal estate taxes. And the highest tax rate is 20% in Hawaii and Washington, well below a 50% tax rate. Which is why when we sat down with the New York City Comptroller, he warned against a move that would pit New York against other states, especially at a time when people are already fleeing for cheaper pastures.
I do think that nationally we should raise the estate tax, both to bring in more revenue and for equity reasons. I think we should be very, very careful about doing it just in New York because people are mobile and they're potentially more mobile later in life when their kids are grown and they may be retired. And it would really undermine the whole purpose of a move like that if people left. We'd actually get less revenue. That would be bad for everybody.
Let's be real for a second. Something about this doesn't sit right because you work your entire life, you save, you invest, you try to build something so your kids don't have to start from zero. And then when you pass away, the government steps in and says, we're taking up to half of that. So think about that in real life, not theory, not politics, real life. A small business owner who spent 30 years building something from nothing. A family that bought a home decades ago that's now worth more just because of inflation. Regular people who did everything they were told to do, and now we're being told that if their estate is worth $750,000 or more, you are suddenly rich enough based on your estate, that your family should lose a huge chunk of it before it even reaches the next generation. And that's what's being pushed here. And what really caught my attention was a clip from Joe Budden's podcast where they're actually talking about this exact policy, this idea coming from Zohran Mamdani and looking at it from a perspective you don't usually hear, because for years we've been told that these kinds of policies are meant to help Black and brown communities. They're about fairness, about closing wealth gaps, about lifting people up. But here's where it starts to fall apart, because when you really look at what this does in practice, it doesn't build wealth, it interrupts it. It cuts it off right at the moment it's supposed to transfer. The very thing people say they want, generational wealth, this makes that harder, not easier. And that's not some abstract talking point. That's just reality when you break it down. So I want to walk through this, keep it simple, really look at what this policy means in the real world and why people are starting to question it. So hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and then I want you guys to check this out.
Think about, we talking about New York State, right? And so when you start thinking about people in New York, especially in New York City proper, so that's the 5 boroughs or anything remotely close, what he's doing, he's taking the rates from 16%. His proposed new rate is 50%. That's a different level of a jump.
For the inheritance tax?
Yes.
The inheritance
one.
tax.
And then the
is there
rate
a cap, pardon me for interrupting, is there a cap on
7 million, I believe is
No. The old start of the inheritance tax used to be $7 million.
That's where you start getting
That's
taxed
where you start
at.
to get taxed.
Oh, okay.
okay.
I'm not mad at that.
He wants to drop it to $750,000.
Oh,
no, that's
So if
cover
you
a lot
start
of shit.
taxing New Yorkers at $750,000, for those of us that live in the area, there you can't find a house in the 5 boroughs for $750,000.
You can't find a 1-bedroom apartment.
That's my point. And so now you're starting to impose way more I don't want to call them sanctions, but way more stress on the poor and the middle class that you ran your campaign on uplifting. Right?
So I want to stop it right there. Now let's break this down, because what they said in this clip actually matters in the real world. They're talking about taking the inheritance tax rate from around 16% and jumping it all the way to 50%. That's not a small change. That's not some minor adjustment. That's a completely different level. And then on top of that, they're not just raising the rate. They're lowering the threshold from around 7 million down to 750,000. So think about what that actually means in a place like New York City. You can't even find a basic home in many areas for $750,000. And we're not talking about mansions. We're not talking about luxury living. We are talking about regular homes, regular neighborhoods, regular families. So now what used to be considered wealthy is being redefined as basically middle class. And this is where it doesn't add up, because the people pushing these kinds of policies always say they want to help the middle class, like he just said, in which Zohran Mamdani raised that issue during his campaign. And they want to talk about helping families. They want to close the wealth gap, right? But what this actually does is put more pressure on those exact people. Let's make this real. Imagine your parents bought a house in Brooklyn or Queens 25 or 30 years ago for maybe $300,000. Nothing crazy, just a normal home. Over time, because of the market, that house is now worth $900,000 or even $1 million. That doesn't mean your family is rich. It means they stayed in one place long enough for prices to go up. Now, your parents passed that home down to you under a policy like this. You could be looking at a massive tax bill just to keep something your family already owns. And here's the problem. Most people in that situation are not sitting on piles of cash. They are what you call asset rich, but cash poor. The value is tied up in the house, not in the bank account. So how do you pay that tax? A lot of times, you don't. You are forced to sell the house. That's how generational wealth gets cut off. That's how families lose what they spent decades building. And this is the part people don't talk about enough. The truly wealthy, the people everyone says these taxes are targeting, they don't play by the same rules. But let's continue.
So, and this is what I want people to understand. Yo, when we start talking about taxing the billionaires and taxing the rich, especially when it comes to inheritance and all that other shit, the term trust fund babies comes from somewhere. They don't pay taxes like that. They put all of their assets and they put all of their money in a trust. And when you die, your trust don't get taxed. So now you putting all this pressure on motherfuckers that don't have the information or don't have the resources to carry out their inheritance that way. And a lot of people, especially in our communities, black and brown, we come up off of insurance policies. We come up off of real estate inheritance, et cetera, et cetera. That's how you gain a leg in the quote unquote wealth gap.
Right.
So now if I inherit a house that's $1 million and I got to pay $500K on $1 million, I ain't inherit. If my parents bought this house for $500,000 when I was 10,
yeah, that's
and now it's nuts.
Yeah.
And so
for New York City, yes.
I think it's counterproductive, again, based on what he said he was going to do for the middle class and the poor. It don't even, to propose it to me is asinine. Whether it gets voted on or not, just to propose, that means you, in my opinion, you have a disconnect on what's going on.
And like I said, right, when it comes to the truly wealthy people, the people everyone says these taxes are targeting, right? When it comes to Zohran Mamdani and the Democrats saying tax the rich, billionaires need to pay their fair share. The rich and the wealthy, they have estate planners, lawyers, financial advisors, entire teams whose job is to structure their assets in a way that legally avoids these taxes. They don't play the same games. They use trust. They move money. They plan years in advance. So when people say we are going after the rich, what this actually look like is something very different. The people with real wealth find a way around it, while the people without those resources, the middle class, especially in expensive cities, end up carrying the burden. And they're pointing that out, right? They point this out directly, that a lot of families, especially in black and brown communities, build wealth through things like life insurance payouts or inherited property. That's often the first real step up. That's how people start closing the wealth gap everyone talks about. So if you step in right at that moment and take a huge portion of it, what are you really doing? From my perspective, you are not helping people build wealth. You are making it harder for them to keep it. And that's why this feels so backwards, because the messaging says one thing, but the real world impact looks completely different.
Out here.
I'm not mad at the 3 to the 5 for the other
For the million.
thing, but the inheritance at $750 is crazy to me.
Bro, even $1 million.
So you don't think people should be taxed at all?
No, they should, but the threshold, especially for New Yorkers, should be higher.
Yeah, like we again, it's an industry specific thing. I don't want somebody in Cleveland to be like, yo, these are stupid, or somebody in Indiana to say we stupid.
Yeah, we talking about New York.
Yeah,
You literally
when
can't
start-
get a one-bedroom condo in New York
Yes,
for
and,
$750,000.
and people don't understand that worldwide. So again, that's why I'm prefacing it with, yo, dog, we talking about New Yorkers. So if you're talking about people that are struggling in the Bronx, people that are struggling in Queens, people that are struggling in Brooklyn, your family passes away, they leave you this asset that may be worth $2 million. Y'all gonna take $1 million of it? Like, get the out of here. That shit don't make no sense. And again, they keep trying to pawn it off as
No,
if,
I don't think that's what's happening. That's not what the policy is.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
Yeah, that's I want to pull up. I'm trying to pull up the exact policy. But first of all, it's on estates, right?
Estate.
So it's not just on houses. It's on like the estate. So if I have just to be clear, just
No,
to
no,
be
no,
on estate.
it's on estate.
So if I have an estate of $5 million, the idea is if I'm leaving that to you, you have to pay taxes on it. It doesn't mean that if it's because the estate might be valued at $1 million. If I leave you a house for $1 million, I haven't even sold the house. I don't have to cough up $500,000.
Okay.
But I do have to pay taxes on part of it. And the reason for it, to me, and I'm going to put up the exact numbers so we can get into exactly what it looks like on the grounds. I didn't know this. I only knew the first part of the story that I brought up. Ish brought this to us this morning, so I didn't get a chance to read into it beforehand. But it's important to know that the top rate is 50%. Not all of it is 50%.
Okay.
So
Now, what you're hearing, right, is basically an attempt to soften how this sounds. Like, okay, it's not 50% right away. Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%. It ramps up over time. But let's be real for a second. How does that actually change anything? It doesn't. If you're sitting at that lower threshold, say around $750,000, and they hit you with even a 20% tax, that's still $150,000. That's not small money. That's not something that the average person just has sitting around.
if I inherit $750,000, I wouldn't be paying 50%. The person who inherits $7 million and above would be getting the 50%. But I haven't seen a schedule to know what the steps are. So I don't know whether it's 20%, whether it's 30%. But it will go up. The exemption is no longer up to $7 million. I think that's important to note. But to my point, again, like I don't think it's a contradiction to say I'm for poor people or I'm for even the middle class and saying I'm going to raise the tax rate on people who are inheriting stuff. I get the idea of wanting to pass wealth on to your children. I get the idea of wanting to share those things. I get it. But I'm not convinced, even in New York, that somebody who inherits, say, a $3 million property right now, or a $3 million estate, whatever it is, shouldn't have to pay some taxes if they're getting $3 million.
you have to pay taxes.
Like I said, think about what this looks like in real life. Most of the value is probably tied up in a house, maybe a retirement account, maybe some savings. It's not liquid. It's not cash. You can't just pull it out and hand over. So now what happens? You're forced in a situation where you either have to come up with that money somehow when it comes to taxes, maybe take out a loan, maybe refinance, maybe you sell the property altogether. But either way, the government is forcing your hand. And that's the part they don't want to talk about enough. You're not just taxing wealth. You're forcing people to break apart what their family built just to pay the bill. And from my perspective, that completely undermines the idea of generational wealth, because let's simplify this. Generational wealth doesn't come from magic. It doesn't come from government programs. It usually starts with the person making disciplined choices over a long period of time. One person who says, I'm going to live a little below my means, I'm going to save, I'm going to invest, and I'm going to leave something behind so my kids have a better starting point than I did. That's how this actually works. It's not glamorous. It's not fast. It takes years, sometimes decades, and it requires sacrifice. Maybe that means fewer vacations, fewer things when it comes to subscription services. When you want to have your Netflix and your Hulu, maybe it means buying a modest home instead of stretching for something bigger. But the goal is simple. You're trying to build something that lasts beyond you. Now, think about what happens when the government steps in at the exact moment that wealth is supposed to transfer and takes a chunk out of it. That's $150,000 less your kids get. That's less money for them to invest, less stability, less opportunity. And if that cycle repeats across thousands of families, what you're really doing is slowing down wealth building at the exact point where it's supposed to accelerate. And this is where the bigger contradiction comes in, because you hear a lot of people talking about closing the wealth gap, especially in Black and brown communities. And to be fair, that's a real concern people have. But policies like this don't help solve that. They make it harder for families to take that first step up. A lot of people build their initial wealth through things like inheriting a home or receiving a life insurance payout. And that's often the first real foundation. So if you reduce that, if you chip away at that through taxes, you're cutting into the very thing that helps people move forward. And here's where it really doesn't add up, because the people who are best positioned to deal with these kind of taxes, the truly wealthy, have systems in place to minimize or avoid them. And they have estate plans, trusts, legal strategies. They prepare for this years in advance. The average person doesn't. So again, who actually feels this the most? It's not the ultra wealthy. It's the people in the middle who are trying to do the right things, who made smart decisions, who played by the rules, and are now being told they owe a significant portion of what they're passing down. And from my perspective, that sends the wrong message. It tells people that even if you do everything right, even if you sacrifice and plan ahead, the system is still going to take a piece of what you built. And when you step back and look at that, it's hard to see how that encourages more people to build, save, and invest for the future.
Already.
But New York is one of the few states that had that sort of, there's a federal tax you pay on it, but the rate is fairly, in New York, is fairly like nothing when you have the exemption.
That's relative. Number
Yeah,
one,
I
like
don't know about that,
I've gone through this.
It's not relative. I'm saying let me put it differently. It's literally zero up to right now up to $7 million.
I've gone through this, right? So it depends. Like I know New Jersey law and I know Maryland laws. In New Jersey, if somebody passes away and they leave their estate, it depends on your relationship to the person.
Right.
So if you are the wife, the spouse, or the kids, then you don't pay a tax on property.
Okay.
Right? If you're a sibling, if you're somebody else, then you pay a tax. However, when we start to, again, talk about, and this is where it gets funny, because when you start throwing these numbers out, like Mark threw a number out like $5 million, $10 million. If I have $10 million of assets, that means I also have $10 million of information where I'm going to protect those assets when it's time for me to pass away, to where my family's not going to pay taxes at all. That's one key point, is the information of the rich. They always find a loophole to escape paying taxes.
That's a fact.
So it's going to disproportionately affect us, or the people that are in a different tax bracket that don't have that information and don't have a trust or don't have somebody to have set up their estate situations. Again, in our community, sometimes don't even have life insurance. So if you are a family that you didn't come up off a life insurance policy, that house that your mother left you or that house that your father left you, that might be your only thing that you could build wealth off of. And so now to tax that in a way that to some might seem minimal, to most might not seem minimal, it is disheartening to me.
I got to read more.
I got to read more to know the schedule. To me, the devil's.
And I think, family, also begs the bigger question. Should we be looking at a house that you stay in and live in, that's passed down for you to stay and live in from your family from generations to generations? Should we just be looking at a house just for somewhere to live, instead of just looking at it as if we're trying to close a wealth gap, anticipating that we won't be taxed enough, where we can have equity in the house, and then when we decide to pass it along and whoever wants to sell it in the family, they'll have money where that can initiate the wealth? But is that truly something we should look for, is besides building assets around it and just looking at a home, and where we should just be living there and not looking at it as an investment home, even though we live there, to say whenever we sell it, we'll have the money. Let's just make sure and hope and pray that we don't be taxed enough, like New York is doing, to where the point where we're going to be forced to sell and we won't have no investment, because we still got to pay property taxes so high that it's forcing us to not even be able to keep the home, to even hope to sell it when we want to sell it, to close the wealth gap, to initiate generational wealth within the family. So should we just be looking at home just to be a place to stay, instead of looking at it as an asset and build assets around it, like properties or something else, rental properties, instead of just looking at, oh, I got a home now, I got my home, I live in it, and I got investment? How about we just look at a home for just somewhere to live and lay our head and sleep and eat and things like that, and take care of ourselves, and not initially an investment? Because now it becomes more burdensome, and also it becomes more let downish, because now you thought, oh, my home is investment. When I'm ready to go, I have the money. And that's not necessarily true, as we've seen play out, if you can't even maintain the property taxes. And the thing is, how about we just look at it for somewhere to live that is doable, and you don't get more house than what you need, but also making sure you get a house where the property taxes are so high where you're able to maintain, to be able to have a place over your head to live, right? I don't know. That begs a different conversation, but also the bigger question. Let me know. Do you think we should just stop looking at our homes based on equity as an investment to close the wealth gap and just look at it just as a place to live and build assets to focus on truly like rental properties and stuff like that, let me know down in the comments. But when I look at this is where the conversation really starts to come together, because when you look at it, they're basically admitting that the part most people already know but don't always say out loud. The people with real money, the people with serious wealth, they don't just sit around and wait to get taxed. They prepare, they plan, they have a system in place. And if elsewhere you see them pack up and leave because they want to preserve more of their wealth and keep money more to themselves. If you want to tax to death, I have resources and I have monies to get up and go, thinking nothing about it. Because at the end of the day, I'm gonna protect my wealth by any means necessary because I built something. And I'm not going to have the government, in this case, New York Pacific, since we're talking about a certain state, to take my wealth and tax me to death. I could just go elsewhere because my resources can allow me to do so. So, like I said, they have systems in place. If someone has $10 million in assets, they also have access to $10 million worth of knowledge. And it always goes back to the saying, if you teach a man how to fish, he will eat forever. But if you just fish for them, they will starve when you're no longer there. In the middle class, to put this metaphorically, to bring it all together, the middle class just look at it like, oh, okay, I got life insurance, I got a house, I got money sitting in it. But the thing is, the wealthy is looking at it, okay, well, I got the knowledge to preserve my wealth enough to even have access to assets and access to resources, let alone money, to up and leave to preserve my resources, let it be taken away if policies decide to change in my state, versus someone who just, okay, I got given a house, but I can't preserve the house. You get what I'm saying? So teach a man how to fish, he'll eat forever. If you fish for the man, he'll starve. So when I look at that, with the systems being in place and the strategy protected from the wealthy, that means trust, legal structures, estate planning, all set up ahead of time. So that when that wealth gets passed down, it's done in a way that minimizes or completely avoids these kinds of taxes. That's just reality. So when you hear politicians say, we're going to tax the rich, you have to ask yourself, are they really? Or are they going after the people who don't have access to those tools, aka resources? Because what this actually looks like in real life is that the people who don't have financial advisors, who don't have lawyers on standby, who maybe never even set up a trust, those are the ones who get hit the hardest because they don't have the information, let alone the resources to preserve as much as possible. It's not that they can't get it, but it's harder because how are you going to climb a mountain with rocks in your backpack? You're too busy trying to pay this property tax that went up, that's taking all your money. So now you don't have money to be able to get the information to get these resources. So you're basically penny pinching and struggling to get the information to try to preserve your wealth, but you're being taxed to death so much that by the time you can even figure a way how to preserve it, you really can't, because now you're forced to, your hands are tied. You're forced to figure out what to do with your home, and you can't really get the equity from it because you got debt based on taxes, and the state tax you to death, property tax wise. So I want to use another example. Think about a family where the only real asset is the house their parents left behind. Like I just said, no big investment portfolio, no complicated estate plan, just a home. That house might be the one opportunity for the next generation to build something, to maybe rent it out, maybe sell and invest, maybe just have stability. And now you're putting a tax on that moment. And for some people, that tax might not sound like a lot on paper, but in real life, it could be different. It could be the difference between keeping the asset or losing it, is my whole point. And you even hear the back and forth. One side is saying, well, the rich always find a way around it. And the other side is saying, well, then we need better rules. But here's where it doesn't add up. If the system already shows that the truly wealthy can navigate around these policies, then who is left holding the bag? It's the people who don't know how to play the game, as they put it. And from my perspective, it's not fairness. That's targeting the most accessible group of taxpayers, and not to mention that the wealthy already pay the bulk of the tax, right? But when they say tax the wealthy is already paying the maximum amount of taxes because they make so much money. So really, taxing the wealth just means taxing you, the middle class, aka lower class individuals, because that's what it's going to trickle down to, because the wealthy have the knowledge and information to preserve their wealth, let alone get up and leave. Oh, you want to tax this devil? I'll just go somewhere to a state that actually advocates for me to keep more of my money, so then I can continue to spread my resources and have my family and build my family here, live the American dream, and continue to be a viable asset to my communities within this state that promotes for me to be able to pave a way for myself, which then creates an income system to promote within that state independence and where individuals thrive because they're not dependent on the government daddy. There's nothing wrong with a help here and there or a leg up. Life be life and for everybody. But I'm saying the simple fact is, if you have a state that promotes, less property taxes, literally to none, which Florida is doing, passing a law to get rid of property taxes entirely for you to keep more of your money, then you're able to travel and splurge more and have more spending power to have these resources to preserve your wealth and also to pour back into that state, which is incentivize you to do, which is to enjoy that state, whether it's going out to eat, going out to restaurants and do more. But if you're restricted and you have less, you can't do more with less. So when I'm looking at this connects to a bigger pattern we've seen play out in multiple cities with Chicago.
In the details, I agree with you that the rich circumvent the rules, but to me, that's the argument for making better rules.
But that's the argument that they push when they act as if it's in fairness. Like, yo, we gonna tax all
Well, I
these.
think this isn't fairness.
We gonna tax all these billionaires. No, you're not.
Yeah, they already are exempt. They know how to play the game.
Right.
So the ones you're gonna tax are the
people
who are
that don't
newly
know how to
here,
play the game.
and they don't know how to play the game.
But I think that's why this policy could be useful. Again, the devil's going to be in the details. But also, when I think about the people who are the most affected, people like us, we don't. For example, poor black people, we don't inherit houses. We don't.
It's not true, Mark.
You think-
Especially now, we are starting to be more on the side of inheriting houses.
We are disproportionately inheriting debt. We're disproportionately inheriting houses that aren't paid off.
Yeah.
We're inherently
Doesn't matter. Still equity in the house. That still's a value. That still's a net value.
What I'm saying is that black income. There's difference, as you know, difference between income and wealth. And what I'm saying is, black people are disproportionately we're underrepresented on the wealth side.
Zero.
That's
Dead last.
Right. So that's all I'm saying. And so it's not like the most vulnerable people in New York City are the ones who are about to get hit hard because they're inheriting these houses that they don't have to pay extra taxes on. I'm saying that the people who are often getting around the rules are more likely to get ensnared with this policy based on the way it's been laid out than the people who we're trying to protect. That's what I'm saying. It's not. My auntie's not inheriting a $5 million house.
You keep going to 5 million. Stay at $1 million.
Okay,
stay at 1.5.
Okay,
We're in New York
1.5,
City.
sure,
So
1.5.
the minimal house, you could get a piece of
Two-bedroom apartment.
All right, cool. So now you could get a piece of house in New York City, and no disrespect to Queens. Let's say Queens or Brooklyn, right? You could get a house that's $1.5 million. Again, the wealth for black people ranks dead last amongst ethnicities in the United States of America. We are last.
Yeah.
So now we are starting to get information based on EYL like that. We are starting to get information on how to wealth build.
Yeah.
Cool. You may not have all of the vehicles set up to wealth build, but for a majority of people, I'm arguing with you that people own houses. And grandparents own houses and mothers own houses, and they are leaving these houses to their kids. So when you start taxing these people at a high clip, 16% to me is too much.
Yeah, see, that's where we disagree. I'm not disagreeing that grandmothers bequeath houses. I'm simply saying that.
All right, so take Chicago, for example. The message was the same: tax the rich, make things more fair, make the wealthy pay their fair share. But what actually happened? Businesses left, wealth left, property values in key areas dropped, and the city still has spending commitments that didn't go away. So what did they do? They shifted the burden. Property taxes went up on regular homeowners to fill the gap. So the same people who were told this won't affect you ended up paying more. The lower class and middle class individuals, not the rich, because they left. And that's why people are skeptical when they hear these promises now, because they're looking at it like, wait, hold up. I got to investigate this, because we seen how it plays out with Chicago, and now New York is like, oh, right? It starts with, we are only targeting the wealthy, but over time it moves down the ladder. And when you look at the threshold, like $750,000 in a place like New York, it's hard to ignore that this is only hitting the ultra rich. That's upper class, that's upper middle class, that's middle class in a high cost city. That's people who worked, saved, bought property, and held on to it. It's not the ultra rich, it's the upper middle class and the middle class. And this is the part that doesn't get enough attention. Most of the tax base in the country isn't coming from billionaires. It's coming from middle and upper middle class. That's where the consistent, reliable tax revenue is. So reliable, because remember, the rich have the knowledge to exploit loopholes legally. So not to mention, though, the rich still pay majority of taxes. They still do. So when policies like this are introduced, even if they are framed one way, they often end up pulling from that group, which is the middle, upper middle class, because they're more reliable. Because as we know, when it comes to, for example, like Chicago, a Democratic mayor, you know, Mayor Brandon Johnson, and then now when it comes to most of the Democrats happen to be right now and currently wanting to tax more and more, they have to make sure they have reliable form of revenue. So that's why the upper middle class to middle class is reliable, the reliable tax revenue to keep taxing. And that's why, in my view, you have to look past the messaging and focus on the outcome, because the outcome tends to follow the same pattern. You hear tax the rich, but what turns into is more pressure on the middle class. You hear this won't affect you, but then it does. And over time, those small increases, those new thresholds, those added taxes start to stack up. Sorry, they start to stack up. And when you zoom out, what you're really looking at is a system that becomes harder and harder for the average person to build and pass down wealth. And that's the bigger picture here, because if the goal is to create more opportunity to help people move up, to close gaps, the policy should be making it easier for families to keep and grow what they build. This is why your local legislators, meaning your governors and your mayors, you have to get involved and vote correctly to make sure that your state, let alone also the country, because not only do you represent a state, but we still are the amazing United States of America, which I would never go against. I'm pro-America. But my point is, you have to get involved so that you can continue to preserve that wealth, because your voice is your vote. Now, like I said, you have to make sure these policies are making it easier for families to keep and grow what they build, not taking a larger share of it right at the moment it's supposed to benefit the next generation. And that's why a lot of people are looking at this and say, this isn't really about taxing the rich. It's about expanding the tax base and the wealth that ultimately lands on the middle class. And once you see that pattern, it becomes a lot harder to ignore. And when you look at that, the most revealing moments in this whole video or clips or whatever, you hear the claim straight up: poor black people don't inherit houses. And immediately someone pushes back and says, that's not true. And let's be real for a second. That kind of statement says a lot more than people realize, because what that's really doing is painting an entire group of people with the same brush. It assumes that black families don't build, don't own, don't pass things down. And from my perspective, that's not just wrong. It's actually part of the problem. Because if you start from the mindset that certain groups of people aren't building wealth, then the policies you support are going to reflect that assumption. You're not thinking about protecting ownership. You're thinking about redistribution. But here's what this actually looks like in real life. There are plenty of black families, Hispanic families, all kinds of families across this country who bought homes years ago, who worked steady jobs, who saved what they could, and who absolutely plan to pass something down to their kids. It may not be a mission. I mean, it may not be a mansion, not a mission. It may not be a mansion. It may not be millions of dollars, but it's something. And for a lot of people, that something is everything. And they're simple. Some people are simple. They don't want $1 billion. They want to keep their ranch or their farm. Right. And that's the foundation. That's the starting point for the next generation to do better. So when you hear someone casually say, oh, they don't inherit houses, what that ignores is the reality that more and more families are trying to do exactly that: build stability and pass it on. And this ties directly back to the bigger issue with policies like this, because if you create a system that penalizes people at the moment, they pass something down, you're not helping the people who are trying to move forward. You are slowing them down. And it doesn't matter what your background is. If you make good decisions over time, if you buy property, if you invest, if you think long term, you should be able to pass that on without the government taking a large cut out of it. And that's just common sense to a lot of people. But when the conversation starts from the assumption that certain groups aren't even in a position to build wealth in the first place, then policies like this start to sound acceptable. And that's where it doesn't add up, because instead of encouraging more ownership, more saving, more long-term thinking, what this does is send the message that even if you do manage to build something, it's still going to be chipped away. And from my perspective, that's the wrong direction, because if the goal is to see more people succeed, more people own homes, more people pass something down to their kids, the focus should be on making that easier. But I catch you in the next one, not putting more obstacles in the way, right? It should be making that easier. But I catch you in the next one. Love you guys. Peace.